In the Game of Thrones TV show, King's Landing was burned. Will that happen in the books as well? And if so, who will do the burning? Let's take a look. Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek. If you like theories, background, history and lore about A Song of Ice and Fire, The Lord of the Rings and The Witcher, this is the place for you. Welcome. This is another collaboration with the wonderful History of Westeros. Please do check out their podcast and YouTube channel. There's a link in the description. Jaime Lannister famously earned the nickname Kingslayer for killing Aerys II Targaryen, but it was also an act that saved King's Landing from utter devastation. Jaime learned that the Mad King had hidden caches of wildfire all over the city, and he remembers that they were placed, quote, beneath Baelor's Sept and the hovels of Fleabottom, under stables and storehouses, at all 7 gates, even in the cellars of the Red Keep itself. In other words, caches of wildfire were hidden under all of King's Landing, with the clear intention of destroying all of the city and killing thousands, tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of innocent citizens. Jaime didn't just kill the king planning this, he tried his best to dismantle the entire plot. He killed Rossart, the head pyromancer, before forcing others to reveal the locations of those caches of wildfire, which he then presumably neutralized. We don't actually get clarity on how he did that. And killing the other guilty pyromancers. It makes for a great backstory, and tragic in its own way that Jaime emerged known as Kingslayer rather than saviour of the city. But it might not end there. Aerys may yet have his revenge from beyond the grave. During a clash of kings, Howland, the pyromancer, tells Tyrion that an accidental discovery of 300 of Aerys' jars of wildfire was made at the Dragon Pit. He also tells Tyrion that the older the jars are, the more unstable they become, and A Dance with Dragons takes place roughly 17 years after Aerys' death. We might dismiss the missed cache as an isolated incident, just one cache Jaime missed in the fog of war, except that it happens again. 200 jars were found beneath the Great Sept of Baelor. Note that Jaime named the sept in the quote above, so he obviously dealt with some there, which calls into question every other place he thought he'd cleared. Which, given the instability of those old caches of hidden wildfire, hints at a nightmare scenario where any number of fires, even lesser ones, could trigger a green inferno that spreads much further. Any one of the caches going off could ignite others. At which point we should acknowledge that the portrayal of wildfire on the TV show, most notably during the Battle of the Blackwater, was visually stunning, but it was notably weaker than its book counterpart. Book wildfire isn't just hot fire. It spreads relentlessly. Tyrion was worried in the books that his plans would, pardon the pun, backfire, leading to parts of the city catching flame, which would in turn spread to the Pyromancers Guild, detonating all their stores of wildfire, creating an even larger explosion. Tyrion was basically worrying that him using wildfire on the water outside the walls of King's Landing could trigger a chain reaction that would destroy King's Landing itself. Powerful stuff. And of course, also on the TV show, Cersei used wildfire to blow up the Great Sept, eliminating the High Sparrow, Marjorie, Loras, and lots of other enemies and threats. Could this happen in the books as well? Given her likely overreaction to the murder of her Uncle Kevin, yes, or at least something similar, and perhaps something even more explosive. To start, in the books, as on the show, the Pyromancers Guild is located within Rhaenys' Hill, while the Great Sept of Baelor is on top of Rhaenys' Hill. So George R.R. Martin certainly placed them conspicuously close to each other. So not only is there the possibility of another missed cache, or caches, below the Great Sept, the Pyromancers have their headquarters right below it as well, with who knows how many pots of wildfire. And Cersei has quite a lot of wildfire association in the books. Tyrion put a huge amount of effort and planning into the wildfire defense strategy during the Battle of the Blackwater, making it easy to forget that it was actually Cersei's idea in the first place. Tyrion liked the idea, but only if someone careful like him was in charge. Much later, after Tyrion fled to Essos, she destroys the Tower of the Hand using wildfire, using a controlled burn. There were no accidents and all went according to plan, but she spent an inordinate amount of time watching. And as the flames brighten, her thoughts darken. She feels empowered by it, empowered to do awful things. Jaime thinks the look in her eye is like the Mad King's when he saw wildfire. So might she use wildfire to blow up all her enemies while they are gathered in one place? she will surely at least think about it. In the show, the Great Sept explosion was spectacular. Wildfire flew in all directions and the giant bell came crashing down, but then nothing much else happened. The wildfire didn't spread or cause any problems we were made aware of, much less igniting any of Aerys's missed caches. But in the books we are told, quote, "Once wildfire takes fire, the substance will burn fiercely until it is no more. More, it will seep into cloth, wood, leather, even steel, so they take fire as well." So if something similar happens in the books, it will be far less clean. If the substance spews in many directions, there will be many fires, and those fires will be nearly impossible to stop. As an example, consider the case of the Great Spring Sickness of 209, which took place about 90 years before the start of the books. The outbreak was so severe that Lord Bloodraven, then Hand of the King, ordered the massive bodies to be taken to the ruins of the Dragon Pit to be burned. This was meant to reduce the spread of the disease, rather sensible, but they used wildfire and they lost control of the fire, despite the fact that this was a controlled burn. Inside the ruins of the stone dragon pit and atop a hill, a full quarter of the city burned down as a result. Given that level of devastation from probably a smaller amount of wildfire, and under supervised use, you can see why I'm dubious that a massive wildfire explosion like we saw on the show would amount to so little outside the sept itself. Not only did the show leave out the consequences of wildfire, it left out an entire plotline that combines both key elements from the Bloodraven and Great Spring Sickness example, plague and massive fires in King's Landing. Aegon, aka Young Griff, and John Connington's plot, and all related Blackfire conspiracies, were dropped entirely. Not to mention apparently huge changes to the Grayscale plotline. Instead of John Connington being a dangerous yet hidden patient zero amidst an entire army moving from place to place which could culminate at King's Landing, the show instead gave Grayscale to Jorah Mormont, a solitary exile who managed somehow to keep a highly infectious disease to himself until he was eventually cured. Jorah ended up at Old Town, where Sam Tarly became a willing helper. John Connington, however, is in the Stormlands and has no intention of letting anyone know he has the disease, let alone seeking help. There is no doubt it will spread. John Connington himself is a powerful parallel to Bittersteel, a chronically angry exile who supports a Blackfire candidate with the Golden Company, and Bloodraven was Bittersteel's greatest adversary. Meanwhile, John Connington was one of Aerys's Hands of the King. He was exiled too, but importantly this came before the wildfire plot, so he presumably knows nothing of it, or the caches of wildfire hidden throughout King's Landing, which could turn out to be a volatile combination. Through his POV chapters we see quite clearly that John Connington's greatest regret in life is failing Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, and he failed Rhaegar by not killing Robert Baratheon when he had the chance. That chance he failed to take was burning the town of Stony Sept. Robert had been hiding there, and though Connington ordered a full search, he had no luck. He considered burning it all to the ground to be certain Robert was killed, but he didn't want to be known as a butcher. He was concerned about his reputation, in other words, and he now hugely regrets not doing more. His lack of ruthlessness gave time for Robert's allies, including Ned Stark, to show up with their armies. The town rang its bells to alert the inhabitants, which as well alerted Robert, who emerged from hiding to help win the day. It turned out he had been hiding in a brothel, which is embarrassing, not for Robert, but for John Connington, because truly the brothels were the first place they should have looked for Robert Baratheon. Had John won the battle, these mistakes would have been overlooked. Had he captured or killed Robert, nothing else would have mattered, but instead he lost what became known as the Battle of the Bells, and Aerys exiled him for it. Which is harsh, but he probably actually got off lightly given Aerys's penchant for burning people with wildfire. Yet, nearly 20 years later, the sound of bells still haunts John Connington. At which point, we should recall that the title of the penultimate episode of the TV show, as well as what rang throughout the city during the conflagration, was The Bells. The show completely cut out John Connington and the alleged son of his beloved Rhaegar, Aegon. They gave Grayscale to someone else, and they seem to have taken the bells from him too. No wonder he's so bitter. It's always dangerous trying to get into the minds of the showrunners of Game of Thrones, because we simply don't know why they made all the decisions they did, but George R. R. Martin has spoken at length about how small changes from the books cause a butterfly effect that can lead to bigger changes. But removing Aegon and John Connington while making huge changes to the Wildfire and Grayscale subplots are not what you would call small changes. These are big changes that would have had to lead to even bigger changes. No mere butterfly wings in this case, these are dragon's wings. This is very important as we consider Daenerys, our final candidate for a King's Landing arsonist. Because Aegon's arc is deeply connected to Daenerys's in many ways, politically, dynastically, and prophetically, to name but a few. Not to mention, we just learned the bells are a John Connington traumatic memory. But George R. R. Martin has given us multiple or overlapping possibilities. Bells aren't just a John Connington thing, they are also a sign of Dothraki victory. As Khaleesi, Dany has bells braided into her hair, denoting her various wins in battle, just as Drogo and others are seen to do. Even if we don't buy into the idea that Dany might fly over King's Landing indiscriminately burning things, it doesn't feel unlike her or her Targaryen ancestors to do so a little more strategically, targeting the Red Keep, say, hoping to kill Aegon or Cersei or whoever is in charge, limiting other casualties. Hold that thought, because we should return briefly to Jaime trying to clear out all the wildfire caches hidden in King's Landing during the sacking of the city by Lannister soldiers. One of the places he thought he'd cleared out was the Red Keep. What if he missed some? Or Cersei had made some new caches? What if Drogon's fire misses its mark? Or there was some unexpected resistance from scorpions mounted, unknowns to all, near some hidden wildfire? Dragonfire from above is not an exact science, and is not only hotter than regular fire, but is also hotter than wildfire, making the combination even more deadly and uncontrolled. Can we really rule out the city burning because of Drogon's fire-breathing and some unknown wildfire caches? I don't think we can. Again, without wishing to place too much weight on what happened on the show, in those scenes there were a few odd plumes of green fire bursting forth in a few places when Dany was on her rampage. There's no explanation given, and it isn't spoken about afterwards, but behind the scenes there were apparently plans to connect Bran's visions of Aerys shouting "burn them all" with Jaime's memories, and this climactic King's Landing scene with Daenerys lighting her father's caches. Instead, they cut the subplot entirely while leaving in the visuals. Which brings us to a dichotomy, or perhaps even a trichotomy. The person or persons or dragons responsible for burning the city might not mean to do it, but accidentally set off the wildfire which can't be controlled, and those responsible might also not be the ones who get blamed for it. We might have several potential culprits, and even if none of them actually want to burn the city down, that might be exactly what happens anyway. If John Connington sets the fires, but people witness Drogon in the skies, who will they blame? She is an easy scapegoat, especially if she is partly responsible. At the House of the Undying, Dany sees a vision which includes a cloth dragon on poles before a cheering crowd. This could be symbolic of a false but popular dragon, Aegon. Varys' plan calls for Aegon to save the realm from calamity and thus win the throne in part by acclaim. There's much to say about both Varys' plan and prophecies related to Dany, but to simplify things for this video, Dany could easily be seen as villainous if she kills a young, handsome prince who many perceive as the realm's saviour, and Varys is an expert at propaganda. He'll do his best to make Aegon look ideal. The wildfire, if it ignites and spreads, will be hard to pin on any one source, but if it does get pinned on someone, the someone who originally put it all there is Daenerys' father, which will not help her case. So this is the Mad King's daughter versus Prince Rhaegar's son, and Westeros has shown itself to not be particularly open-minded on the issue of queens. Worse, she will also be at the head of an army mostly filled with unfamiliar foreign elements like Dothraki and Unsullied, and Westeros is quite xenophobic, while Aegon's army is mostly Westerosi. Dany may or may not be responsible for the burning of King's Landing, but it's easy to see that she may get the blame for it. But let's end on a slightly more positive note, if that's possible in this context. George R. R. Martin is aiming for bittersweet, after all. The inspiration for much of King's Landing is often given as medieval London, and there is a historical echo here that I wonder if George R. R. Martin might play with. In 1665, the Great Plague ravaged London, killing a quarter of its population. A year later, there was the Great Fire of London. Though historians debate the details, colloquial history often credits the fire with ending the plague. In John Connington, we have patient zero of a fantasy plague, Grayscale. Might young Griff's forces take the city, then plague start to take root? Might this great fire of King's Landing bring not just great tragedy, but some hope for the future, with Grayscale being burned out of the city? It's grim, it's dark, but it's possible. But what do you think? Will wildfire caches in King's Landing take fire? And who will be responsible? Let me know in the comments below. If you'd like to see more A Song of Ice and Fire videos like this, there's a link to my playlist on the left of your screen now. Or to support this channel, thank you. There's a link to my Patreon page on the right of your screen. Thanks for watching. That's all for this time. I'll see you again soon.